right, folks, well, I'm very pleased to introduce another person that really doesn't need much by way of introduction, Dennis Richardson, the Secretary of Defence. Welcome to ASPI, Dennis. It's great to have you here. Dennis has been Secretary of the Department since 18th of October 2012. I'm sure many of you will know his previous service in detail, Secretary of Foreign Affairs 2010 to 2012, Ambassador to the United States from 2005 to December of 2009, Director General of ASIO before that. I won't go through the long list of high achievements, but also to mention Principal Advisor to the Prime Minister 1990 to 91. Now, Dennis is going to talk around strategic overview for the year ahead. I know he wants to have a sort of an interactive session with Q&A, but for some opening remarks, please welcome Dennis. Please.
Thanks very much, Peter. Look, given the audience here, I'm a bit intimidated to say anything. Kim can pick me up on anything I say about the US. Bob and I were in East Timor together in 1983, we were, and Chief of Air Force and Chief of Ops can pick me up on any fibs I say about defence. But look, I'm just going to say a few words and then very happy to take questions. I think in terms of looking the year ahead, I would simply make the obvious point. If I was to chop my career up into 5-year lots, beginning in 1969 to the present day, at no point could we have accurately forecast what the world would look like 5 years hence. You go back 12 months and since then, of course, we've had Brexit, we've had the election of President Trump, we've had the election of a new president in the Philippines. Looking out a year, we're going to have elections in France, we're going to have elections in Germany, we've got elections today in the Netherlands, and it's simply not possible to look out 12 months and say, this is how the world will look. And I think one of the big challenges, I think, in policy is to know what your core interests are so that you can act and respond with a degree of calm confidence to the unexpected. You can be quite certain that the unexpected will occur. You might not know what it's going to be, but you know it will happen. And I think how you respond to it is quite critical, and you can't do that unless you have a very clear-eyed view of your own national interests. For Australia, amongst our broader national interests are an open trading system. We are a trading country. We trade a big percentage of our GDP. So having as open an international trading system as we can is in our national interests. People often talk about a rules-based international order, allowing for the degree of flux we're going through and the like. Nonetheless, a system that is rooted in that is certainly in our national interests, given our size and given our shape. And when I talk about size, I think our challenge has always been, in my view, to punch up to our weight, not to talk about punching above our weight. When you consider there are around 193 member states of the UN, we have the 6th largest area. We consider that we've got a small population, but in fact there's around 140 countries in the world with a smaller population than Australia. We have, depending upon what day of the week it is and exchange rates and how you measure it, we have we're certainly in the top 20 in terms of size of economy. We're in the top 15 in terms of defence expenditure in absolute dollar terms. So we're a small country relative to the very big players. We are a relatively large country compared to most. So we can carry weight, we can carry influence, and how we exercise that, I think, is quite critical. Since the Second World War, it's revolved around, one, having a strong alliance partner, two, being heavily involved in international affairs, creating forums in which we have a seat at the table, whether it be the UN in 1945, whether it be APEC in 1989 and the APEC leaders meeting in 1992-93, whether it be the East Asia Summit in 05-06, whether it be the G20 leaders meeting of 2008. Australia has played an active part in the creation of those plurilateral forums in which we also have a seat at the table. Looking specifically at the next 12 months, there's nothing that I can say that would be new. We have the obvious question of the new US administration. I think too many people are going back to what the presidential candidate, President Trump, said, as opposed to what President Trump has said. President Trump has been, in my view, heavily domestically focused. He has said relatively little in terms of the broader international arena, and representatives of his administration in Vice President Pence, in Secretary of State Tillerson, and Secretary of Defence Mathis have been eminently sensible in their public comments, whether it be about NATO, whether it be about the South China Sea, whether it be about relationships with China, whether it be about their commitments to Korea, to Japan. The Trump administration has been very sensible. Nonetheless, the Trump administration and what the Trump administration does or doesn't do cuts into the Australian body politic in a way in which I think few US administrations have, and I think that's going to place a premium on those of us who believe the alliance is important. It's going to place a premium on us being out there in the marketplace, talking about the alliance, its benefits, and also the wider aspects of the Australia-US alliance. The piece by Kim Beazley the other day in the Financial Review, talking about the broader economic relationship between Australia and the US, absolutely essential. Too many people overlook that. The Next 12 months, the US-China relationship, how that continues to play out. That will simply be 1 year in a relationship which has formed for the last decade the key backdrop to the political strategic circumstances in which we as a nation live. And that relationship will form the backdrop to our politico-strategic circumstances over the next 40 to 50 years. I say to young graduates joining the Department of Defence that the Cold War, roughly speaking, went from 1947 to 1992. You can argue about the finer details of that, but roughly a 45-year period. The US-China relationship will play out for longer than that. It will form the key backdrop to our politico-strategic circumstances over the lifetime of everyone now joining the national security community as young trainees and graduates. So, we need to keep the next 12 months in perspective. It will be 1 year in that play out. I think the key thing to watch will be the trading relationship and the potential for that to spill over into the broader strategic relationship. If you look at what Secretary of Defence Mathis said on his recent visit to Japan and Korea about the South China Sea, he was very measured. He talked about the priority of diplomacy. He talked about not radically changing the US defence posture in the immediate future and the like. So I think the Trump administration is coming from a fairly understandable place in that respect. Trade, I think, is the area to watch, and it's too early to say just how that will play out. Looking ahead over the next 12 months, the Middle East is important. Why is the Middle East is important? Because we have members of the ADF in harm's way in Afghanistan and in the Middle East. Wherever you have your own countrymen and women deployed in harm's way, that should dictate a policy priority. Forget the debate about how central the Middle East is to Australia or compared to the region. The fact is we have ADF committed across the Middle East and in Afghanistan, and that alone dictates a policy priority. The continuing fight against ISIL could have flow back into the region, into Australia. You're very familiar with that in terms of our domestic environment. ASIO, the AFP, and others have spoken about that. In the region, in broad terms, I'm still of the view that probably the biggest terrorist threat to our national interest is probably within the region rather than domestically. That's just a broad view. There are still a few too many people in Southeast Asia who, when they think of the West in nasty terms, they think of Australia, and that's never a good thing. And as people return from the Middle East conflict zone, that is going to pose a challenge for us. North Korea, I saw North Korea up on the board in the previous presentation. North Korea is a challenge for all the obvious reasons. There's nothing I can say about North Korea which everyone here is not aware of. North Korea has the potential to fundamentally change the strategic environment in Northeast Asia. We're going to have a new president in South Korea soon. How that changes the equation, we will have to wait and see. The difficulty with North Korea is that it's virtually impossible to see a clear way forward, and that is never a good thing. We all have private views about the options, but I don't think any of us have unambiguous views of clarity. We have, in terms of the next 12 months, cyber security and how that continues to play. That is with us for a long, long time. Indonesia, the elections for the governor of Jakarta. I wouldn't overlook the importance of that. There you've seen an attempted play by extremist elements in Indonesia to enter the mainstream of Indonesian politics, and the outcome of the election in Jakarta will give us an indicator of how successful or otherwise they have been. And of course, in the Pacific, we continue to have fragile states, and the challenges there are self-evident. In terms of defence itself, there's nothing spectacular about the year ahead. It's simply a continuation of the implementation of the White Paper, the implementation of the reform programs we've had in place in defence for some time, and also continuing to work on putting together the new platforms which the government is committed to in the White Paper. The biggest challenge there is going to be the creation of a successful Australian naval shipbuilding industry over the next decade. That's all I'll say by way of interest, but I'm very happy to take questions on really anything. I'm in your hands as to where you want to take it.
Dennis, thank you. And we've got a roving mic, so let me exercise the moderators, right? India was not mentioned on your tour of the horizon. In fact, I recall you and I were there for joint officials talks quite a few years ago. What do you think about the prospects for the bilateral relationship with India?
Look, I think with India it's a question of being patient. First of all, I think you must have your goals, and we do. Each of the last four Australian governments have made significant headway in respect of in growing the relationship with India. The Indian Defence Minister visited Australia for the first time ever in 2013. There is agreement with the Indians that we will commence a 2+2 meeting with them at secretaries level. We are slowly engaging in a range of military exercises with India. However, we do need to be patient, and we shouldn't have unrealistic expectations as to how quickly that relationship will progress, but it is on the right trajectory, and I don't see anything down the track that is going to interfere with that. It'll just be slow, patient going.
Over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Questions for the Secretary?
Peter Clay from CSC. In light of your comments about the uncertainties over the next 12 months, let alone the next 5 years, 10 years, I'm interested in your view on our sovereign industrial capability and how that postures us for, self-reliance.
Well, I think we need to be realistic in when we talk about a sovereign industrial capability. I think we need to define very clearly what is it that is essential and what isn't, what is realistic and what isn't. I don't think, when you say a sovereign industrial capability, what precisely do you mean? I'm sure you don't mean that we have a sovereign capability across the full spectrum of industrial capability. It's a question of identifying those capabilities that are key, that are critical, and to some extent the government has taken a decision on that very front in deciding to have a continuous naval shipbuild in Australia. That's the first time an Australian government has taken such a decision. It has bipartisan support, and that is, I think, a big step in the direction you're talking about.
Kim, you don't really need the microphone.
I probably don't, and thanks for that presentation, Dennis. It was terrific. Look, just a little bit earlier, Peter was talking about things that might be done with the United States and our capacity to have a conversation with them, and I'm sure you're aware of his views. At this point, and it's only going to last 12 months, but it is at this point, there is probably a better bureaucratic structure in the Australian government for running American policy than there is in the United States. There is a yes, you've said there, Mattis, Tillerson, Pence, good things, saying the right things. There is no ballast. There is no infrastructure underneath it to drive it, and at the rate, they've got 45 people now nominated out of the 1,000 that they've got to do. There's just, and that is not going to be cured. Do you think that this might be a moment in which you take your capability, take the capability in foreign affairs, get the government to be interested in what you're doing, and just put up a sort of subterranean emergency committee, which you don't tell the press about, to work out a full court press? There's just one or two worrying things. Things could actually go very bad in Korea, and very quickly and very unexpectedly. Just cite that as one example. You can cite others. But using the great links that you have and that others in your bureaucracy have with their American, or some of their American equivalents, just keep forcing onto the American agenda a common sense and managed approach, because it ain't there.
Oh, well, I can't comment by definition, Kim. No, in point of fact, what you've just articulated, the government has essentially done that. It has. It's what you've said about the slowness of the process below cabinet level is self-evident. Within the Australian government, we have established a mechanism at officials level similar to what you are talking about. I personally believe there's nothing terribly magical or secret about what you do in circumstances such as these. It is good old-fashioned, diplomatic tradecraft. What does that mean? It means, one, having your drakes lined up within your own bureaucracy, and secondly, systematically engaging across the US system. The administration, the Congress, the wider business community, the think tank community, etc. And I think, let me say, I think the government is very conscious of that. I think Joe Hockey is very conscious of it. And Ambassador Hockey, I know, has a range of initiatives going in that space. It also calls for good old-fashioned public diplomacy. That, I think, has got to complement what you do behind the scenes. And Ambassador Hockey has several things he has going in that space, and we're supporting him on it. I think it's also worthwhile bearing in mind that this year marks the 50th anniversary of Pine Gap. It marks the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Coral Sea. These are important milestones in our relationships, and it's important that we use these milestones in a way that reinforces the relationship and acts as a reminder across the broader community about the importance of the relationship. I think it's also important for us not only to talk about the alliance, but to talk about the relationship. And I suspect, Kim, that is precisely what you were doing in the financial review the other day. Too often it becomes a very narrow discussion about the alliance, but it is a much broader issue than that.
Dennis, is there room to also work with Japan on this in terms of shaping American thinking? I noticed Julie Bishop the other day was talking about Japan as our most important strategic partner in the Pacific. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there is, and I think Prime Minister Turnbull and Abe have had discussions along that on that very point. I think we also have a national interest in engaging, as we do, quite intensely in the region. I think at a time of uncertainty, I think we can play a role in providing a sense of some continuity. And I think the government is certainly conscious of that.
Thank you. John, you had a question, and then I'll go to Joe.
Thanks, Dennis. John Blacksman from SDSC. I noticed your kind of parking comment about our involvement in the Middle East in defence of ADF troops there. Can't agree more. I'm wondering, though, about the context and the future, particularly 12 and more months out, when we think about what's coming down the track. The Battle of Mosul seems to be winding up favourably. The Battle of Raqqa looks set to be pretty much a foregone conclusion, and yet the great power challenges in Syria and Iraq are probably actually only on the cusp of reaching the level of intensity that they may well yet reach. And it strikes me that, looking at what the United States has been doing there, they've been developing and managing an effective operational plan, and yet the strategy doesn't seem to be there. I'm wondering if you could kind of reflect on where we might be heading, the Australian contribution there, whether we can shape that strategy, whether it's how much it's in our interests to do so, particularly in light of the clearly growing challenges in our own neighbourhood. And I acknowledge that Defence has been really working in the last couple of years to reinvest in its relationships in the neighbourhood. But I think you would agree that it was from a relatively low base after the focus in the Middle East for the last 15 years. And I know it's great to see some working with Indonesia especially, but it seems to me there's scope for more in our neighbourhood. I acknowledge also Peter's comments about Japan. But our own neighbourhood, we perhaps there's more work to be done there. I wonder if you can comment about where you sense the future is for us in our involvement in the Middle East. Can we value add more? I recognise we hone the force by being there, but in terms of Australia's national interests in a hard-nosed sense of the balance of the equation with the changing dynamics here, the apparent temporary victory, at least in the Middle East, where do we go and what's the best thing for us?
Okay. Right. I agree with what you said about great power engagement in the Middle East, and obviously Battle of Mosul, Raqqa, etc. does not end that dynamic. We should also include Iran in that. Iran, Turkey, so you've got regional interests and you've got global interests all sort of interacting. In terms of broader strategy, that was the whole purpose of the coalition get-together in Brussels about a month ago, which the Minister for Defence went to, and she had an hour-long bilateral with Mathis after that. That bigger meeting was very much about the broader strategy. The US is very conscious of the fact that the challenge, certainly in Iraq, does not end with the defeat on the battlefield of ISIL. The US is very conscious of the fact that unless you have, they're very conscious of the critical need for law enforcement to come in behind any success in the battle space, for infrastructure redevelopment to get underway, and for ethnic tensions and issues to be addressed in Iraq. I think the US is very, very conscious of that. We are also. It's interesting to reflect that ISIL really shot into global prominence in 2014, you might recall. And at one point in 2014, ISIL was challenging the outskirts of the international airport outside of Baghdad. US and Australian military commanders said it would be a 3 to 5 year process. Some people questioned the workability of that. I would simply say that the way it has unfolded so far since the middle of 2014 has been very consistent with the way US and Australian military commanders saw it 3 years ago. Now we've still got a way to run. And from the beginning, it has been everyone from prime ministers down have been conscious that what happens in the battle space is only part of the challenge. But of course, soon as you get beyond the battle space, you are then talking in part about what you can and can't properly do in the context of the internal affairs of another country. That sounds very bland, but that's what you come up against. In terms of our longer term interests in the Middle East, look, I would simply note that what we've been in the Middle East since really, we've had a commitment there since about 47 or whatever. And I remember when I went to Defence in October of 2012, the expectation was that we would wind down in Afghanistan and we would have all this bigger regional engagement. And the Chief of the Defence Force, David Hurley, properly gave at the time a range of speeches on that issue, and indeed I even joined in a few of them. and then something went bang in the middle of the night and we're back in Iraq. The US has not yet completed its review of its strategy in Iraq and Syria. We have fed into that. Mathis was interested in our views. Minister Payne articulated that, and subsequently we gave further written input into that in broad and that input was consistent with what I've just been talking about beyond the battle space. So, you know, I think we need to be careful in terms of, I think in both Afghanistan and Iraq, we need to be careful in pulling the plug too soon. I think no one's, as far as I'm aware, has been talking about boots on the ground or anything like that, but a continued need for training, a continued need for assistance, I think is quite important in both Afghanistan and Iraq. So I see us continuing to be engaged in the Middle East in one way or another, not in terms of boots on the ground, etc., but I think in one way or another for probably quite a while to come. And I don't think that would surprise many people.
Thanks, Dennis. I think I might give the last question to Joe Kelly of the Australian.
Thanks, Mr. Richardson. Joe Kelly with the Australian. If I can just move back to the US relationship, you mentioned that you didn't think enough emphasis had been placed on Trump's actions since he was becoming president. Since that time, we have seen, however, the Australian government challenge the US on a range of fronts. To name a couple of examples, on the TPP, Mr. Turnbull made it very clear that he thought the abandonment of that was a bad idea. He sent a very strong signal. Also on the Nauru-Manus resettlement deal, we saw a clash there between them. So I'm just wondering whether you think moving into the future there'll be a greater divergence or recalibration needed in terms of mutual interests, and whether we'll see more of these challenges and differences of opinion arising.
Well, I think the government's view in respect to the TPP very clear. That's consistent with what I said. I thought the trade space was the one to watch, particularly in terms of its potential to spill over into the broader strategic. I still believe that to be the case. We will continue to argue, as is in our national interests, for it would not be in our interest to see trade issues get out of hand between China and the US, and I suspect the US and China won't want that either. But let's wait and see. On the refugee thing, let me say, I tend to see that in an optimistic framework. Speaking personally, to some extent, I understood President Trump's reaction in the sense that if you look at his campaign mantra, he becomes president and discovers that an arrangement has been entered into between the previous administration and a close ally. I think that would frustrate any democratically elected leader. How you respond in terms of your frustration is, of course, another matter. But I think the bottom line there is that President Trump honoured the agreement, and I think that's the positive I would take out of it. I wouldn't take out of it the fact that there was a little bit of heartburn and a bit of frustration. I would take out of it the fact that despite the fact that President Trump discovered an arrangement which was contrary to his campaign mantra, he decided to honour an arrangement given the closeness of the relationship between Australia and the US. So I think that harbours well for the future, rather than highlighting continuing negatives.
Dennis, the Vice President will be here fairly soon. What do you think is top of the agenda in terms of the discussions we should be having with him?
Oh, I think it'll be everything we've been talking about this morning. I don't think there'll be any secrets in that. And Vice President Pence has been to. He went to the Munich Security Conference. He spoke in reassuring terms about NATO and the like. I think you'll see a continuity in message there.
Well, Dennis, I want to thank you for coming to ASPI. You've given us a pretty broad overview in a remarkably short space of time, so I thank you for that. I think one of the key messages, which is actually a very sensible one, is stay calm, even when things are looking pretty shaky in terms of the international environment. A calm and steady response is the only sensible approach from an Australian perspective. So that's a very useful message to pass on, and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please...
Thanks, Ray. That's a pleasure. No, thank you.